The alien officer arrived at the medical facility with the kind of precision that would have impressed a starship captain. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate, and every expression perfectly neutral. She carried a small kit of personal instruments, metallic, streamlined, and entirely unnecessary for human use, but she insisted on including them as part of her routine. Her uniform was immaculate, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and her boots made a soft, precise click with every step, echoing down the corridor like a metronome. I had been assigned as her nurse for the annual checkup, and even though I was used to humans, nothing in my training had prepared me for an alien who treated a routine medical evaluation like a tactical operation. She paused at the doorway, surveying the room as though it were a newly discovered laboratory. Her eyes, large and metallic flecked, scanned every corner, every instrument, every piece of furniture. I could almost hear the calculations running in her mind. "Environmental conditions are acceptable," she stated, her tone flat but somehow commanding. "Temperature, lighting, air composition, within acceptable parameters for optimal human interaction." Yes, perfect," I mumbled, trying to sound casual while suppressing the urge to run for the exit. She ignored me completely and began her preparation ritual, which was nothing short of ritualistic. First, she removed her outer coat and meticulously hung it on the rack with a level precision I doubted even existed. Then she checked her pulse, noting its stability, followed by a series of stretches that were more like a pre-battle warm-up than anything remotely human. Each movement was precise, angles calculated, balance perfect. She even tapped her wrist to check her heart rate while adjusting her posture. "Hydration levels adequate. Energy reserves within expected parameters. Emotional output minimized," she muttered to herself, jotting rapid notes on her tablet. "Posture optimized. Preparation complete." I blinked. "You really take this seriously, huh? Medical efficiency is paramount. Any deviation in preparation may compromise the validity of observed data," she replied matter-of-factly. I nodded slowly, unsure if I should feel impressed or terrified. Then came the first challenge, her assessment of me. She leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as if to analyze every micro-expression. "Human nurse behavior must be observed for compliance and competence," she said, scanning my movements like a predator studying prey. I swallowed. "Of course. Fully compliant." Her first encounter with the instruments was immediately catastrophic. The blood pressure cuff, a device that every human nurse handled dozens of times a day, was apparently a weapon in her eyes. She recoiled as I approached to inflate it, her limbs stiffening, and a strange clicking sound escaped from her throat. "This device, is it meant to restrain or harm?" No, it just measures pressure," I explained, holding it out cautiously. Her eyes darted to the rubber tube like it might strike. "Verification required. Physical contact minimized." She raised a hand as if warding off a dangerous animal, and somehow managed to twist herself into a position that made checking her pulse nearly impossible. "Next, the reflex hammer." I held it lightly, tapping her knee to check reflexes, but she stiffened instantly, jerking away. "Weapon detected! Defensive measures engaged!" she exclaimed, and in her sudden movement, her elbow knocked over a tray of supplies. I caught the tray just in time, but her sudden flinch sent both of us into awkward proximity, hands brushing accidentally. Both of us froze for a brief, unbearable moment. She blinked at the contact, then scribbled notes, frantically. "Physical interaction unexpected. Emotional metrics, anomaly detected." I coughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "It's just a reflex hammer. Totally harmless." "Yes," she muttered, still scribbling. "But unpredictability of human reaction is significant." As the checkup progressed, every minor touch escalated into chaos. I tried to measure her temperature. She recoiled, muttering about invasive sensory devices. I tried to take her pulse again, and she stiffened so violently that I almost fell backward. Even adjusting her clothing slightly to access her arm resulted in her flailing briefly before she regained composure. Despite the absurdity, there was a strange, rhythm forming. Every exaggerated reaction, every startled blink, every accidental brush of hands created a pattern of interaction that neither of us had anticipated. Somewhere between the chaos and the protocol, subtle glances began to linger. The alien officer, for all her rigidity and discipline, seemed increasingly aware of me in ways that were unquantifiable: interest, curiosity, maybe even something else. Finally, after what felt like hours, she stepped back and inspected her notes. Preparation phase complete. Data collected on all initial human interactions and device tolerances. Emotional response patterns recorded. Preliminary conclusions: human procedures are inefficient, but enjoyable in an unexpected manner. I swallowed, heart racing from both relief and the lingering contact. Enjoyable, huh? Yes, she replied, eyes scanning me briefly before returning to her notes. Engagement with human nurse produces positive anomaly beyond expected parameters. I chuckled nervously. I'm glad I could help with your data anomalies. Her head tilted, and I swear I saw something like a small, almost imperceptible smile. Further interactions required for accuracy of measurements, she said, though the words carried a subtle undertone of anticipation. And so, the stage was set. The alien officer, disciplined, meticulous, and terrifyingly precise, had begun her annual checkup, and inadvertently turned it into a chaotic, hands-on, and undeniably flirtatious adventure that neither of us could have anticipated. The real challenge wasn't the medical protocol. It was navigating the strange, unpredictable, and increasingly enjoyable interaction between human and alien. The moment arrived for the first real hands-on procedures, and it quickly became clear that neither of us had been fully prepared for what that would entail. The alien officer perched herself on the examination table with perfect posture, eyes fixed straight ahead, as if daring me to make a single mistake. I approached cautiously, instruments in hand, heart hammering with anticipation and just a touch of apprehension. The first test was a simple pulse check. I gently placed my fingers on her wrist, expecting a straightforward reading. Instead, she stiffened so violently that my fingers were almost knocked aside, and a strange clicking noise escaped her throat. "Unscheduled contact detected," she announced, scribbling furiously on her tablet. "Please verify intent." I swallowed and forced a laugh. "It's just a pulse check. Totally harmless." "Verification noted," she said tersely, though her eyes flicked down at my hands for a fraction longer than necessary, and a faint warmth flushed across her cheeks, or whatever counted as her cheeks. "Physical contact. Anomaly remains significant." Next came the blood pressure cuff. I had barely looped it around her arm when she recoiled dramatically. "Threat detected. Compression device active. Initiating defensive posture." Her arm shot upward, sending the cuff flying across the room, and I lunged to catch it before it clattered to the floor. Our hands collided as I returned it to her arm, and we froze, staring at one another. The alien's eyes widened slightly, and she scribbled another note. "Unplanned tactile interaction, emotional variance detected." I could not help but grin nervously. "I promise, no harm intended." Her lips, or the closest approximation, pressed together in a tight line. "Intent verified, but anomalies persist. Efficiency of human medical procedures is questionable when subject exhibits heightened sensitivity." Then came the reflex hammer. I tapped her knee lightly, expecting a normal response. Instead, she jumped so violently that she nearly toppled off the table. "Offensive instrument detected. Defensive protocol engaged," she declared, grabbing the edge of the table for balance. My hand brushed hers again, and this time, the contact lingered a fraction too long for either of us to ignore. The warmth, the small spark of awareness in her gaze, it all felt dangerously close to human attraction. "Relax, it's just a reflex test," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Relaxation, optional," she replied, still scribbling, though her movements had slowed slightly as if distracted. "Emotional output from proximity, higher than predicted." By now, the checkup had devolved into a series of small disasters and comic mishaps. Every instrument I brought near her body elicited an exaggerated reaction, flinches, startled noises, even a few curious glances at me that seemed entirely unprofessional. Yet somehow, amidst the chaos, the air between us had shifted. Each accidental touch, each brief brush of hands, each prolonged gaze was no longer just an experiment, it was something far more personal. When it came time to measure her flexibility and range of motion, I had to guide her through stretching exercises. Her limbs were precise, angular, and rigid, but the effort to follow my instructions led to repeated accidental contacts. My hand would rest briefly on her shoulder, her hand would brush against mine, and each time, a blush, or whatever counted as a blush on her metallic flecked skin, seemed to creep across her. She scribbled furiously in her notebook but kept sneaking glances at me, almost as if trying to reconcile her scientific focus with a growing curiosity she didn't yet understand. At one point, adjusting her posture caused her to tip forward slightly, and our faces were perilously close. She froze mid-movement, eyes wide, scribbling notes with one hand while using the other to steady herself. I felt my own pulse spike. "You're okay?" I asked, voice unsteady. "Yes," she said, though her voice was softer than before. "Measurement complete. Emotional deviation, significant. Must continue with protocol." Even the seemingly mundane act of checking her temperature became a comedy of errors. She flinched at the thermometer, pulled her arm back instinctively, and accidentally knocked my hand. I caught it midair, and for the briefest moment, we locked eyes. Something unspoken passed between us, a recognition that this routine procedure had become more than a checkup. By the end of the session, we were both flushed, me from nerves and suppressed laughter, her from, well, whatever counted as alien embarrassment. She leaned back on the table, inspecting her notes, and muttered, "Physical interactions during medical procedures are more engaging than predicted." I chuckled, exhaling a shaky laugh. "Engaging, huh? I'd call it a little chaotic, personally." Her gaze flicked toward me, just for a moment, a flicker of something soft and almost human in her expression. Observation logged. Emotional engagement, unanticipated. Further interactions recommended for data integrity. I grinned. "Looks like we'll be doing this again." "Yes," she replied, tapping her stylus on the tablet, eyes briefly meeting mine with a subtle warmth. "Further research required." And with that, the first hands-on session ended, a chaotic, hilariously awkward tangle of flinches, accidental touches, and unintentional intimacy that neither of us could have predicted. The alien officer's precision, my human nervousness, and the sheer absurdity of the checkup had combined to create a situation that was simultaneously professional, ridiculous, and undeniably charged. For the first time, both of us realized that the annual checkup wasn't just a medical necessity. It was the beginning of a strange, funny, and surprisingly intimate dance that neither of us was prepared to step away from. The next session began with a sense of cautious anticipation, though either of us could ignore the lingering tension from the previous hands-on exercises. The alien officer entered the room with her usual calculated precision, but there was a subtle difference in her demeanor. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward me, longer than necessary for mere observation, and her posture, though still rigid, seemed to relax ever so slightly when I approached. I had prepared for more misadventures, but I was unprepared for just how chaotic and personal this session would become. We started with advanced examinations, exercises designed to measure flexibility, reflexes, and physiological responses in ways that were entirely unnecessary for humans. Every movement required guidance, and with guidance came repeated, awkward contact. I had to adjust her arm here, steady her leg there, and each time, our hands brushed in ways that lingered just a moment too long. She flinched occasionally, scribbled furiously in her tablet, and muttered notes about anomalies in her emotional readings. Yet, with each brush of our skin, the tension between us grew, and I found myself laughing at the absurdity of it all. Her reactions were extreme, unpredictable, and somehow endearing. When I gently guided her through a stretch, she pulled back suddenly, thinking I was overstepping some invisible boundary. I had to reassure her repeatedly. "It's okay, I'm just helping with your range of motion." But each reassurance only seemed to increase the awkward intimacy of the situation. She scribbled notes like, "Unexpected proximity causes emotional spike," and "Physical touch triggers heightened awareness," her stylus moving so fast it was nearly a blur. Then came the reflex exercises, which quickly devolved into a comic ballet of misunderstanding. I tapped her knees, elbows, and shoulders with the reflex hammer, and she flinched or twitched in ways that made every test take 3 times as long as it should have. During one particularly exaggerated reaction, her hand shot out, accidentally brushing mine. We froze, staring at each other, both aware of the warmth and the spark that had nothing to do with physiology. She scribbled rapidly, muttering about anomalies, while I tried, and failed, to suppress a laugh. The chaos escalated when a minor technical glitch caused one of her personal monitoring devices to beep unexpectedly. She jumped, grabbed my arm instinctively, and held it against her chest. I could feel her pulse racing beneath her sleek uniform, and though her eyes were wide with alarm, there was also a glimmer of curiosity. "Unauthorized tactile stimulus detected," she murmured, still clutching my arm. "Emotional deviation beyond predicted thresholds." I stifled a laugh, my own heart racing, and carefully disentangled us. "It's just a malfunction," I reassured her. "Nothing serious." Her head tilted slightly, and for the first time, she didn't immediately return to her tablet. Instead, she studied me with a mixture of analytical intensity and something softer, something that was not data. The moment stretched, and I realized that the alien who had once treated human contact as a potential threat was now engaging with me on a level that was entirely personal. Next, we moved on to coordination and balance tests. She followed my instructions precisely, but the exercises required repeated corrections, hand placements, and adjustments. Each time our hands met, there was a small spark of electricity, not literal, but a tangible awareness of proximity. She scribbled constantly, recording data points like human hand contact, duration 3.2 seconds, emotional spike observed, and proximity-induced anomaly, blush-like coloration detected. I laughed out loud at the absurd specificity, and for the first time, she paused mid-note, clearly intrigued by my reaction. Then there was the unintended jealousy incident. A human colleague walked past the room, glancing briefly at the checkup. The alien officer's eyes narrowed, and her tail, or whatever appendage extended from her back, twitched. She leaned subtly toward me, a protective, possessive gesture that was both ridiculous and oddly endearing. "Unauthorized competitor in observation field," she muttered. "Mitigation required." I nearly choked on laughter. "It's just a passing glance," I said, trying to maintain my composure. She scribbled furiously, then glanced up with a faint tilt of her head. "Data indicates emotional response inconsistent with previous parameters. Subject attachment developing?" By the end of the session, both of us were exhausted, physically and emotionally. The alien officer's notebook was filled with indecipherable scribbles, charts, and marginalia, documenting every microreaction, every accidental brush of skin, and every awkward pause. Yet beneath the rigorous analysis, there was a subtle shift. She was no longer just an observer. She was participating, experiencing, and perhaps enjoying the hands-on contact more than she would admit. As we prepared to conclude, our hands accidentally met one final time while adjusting equipment. Neither of us pulled away immediately. I could feel the warmth, the subtle pulse, and the unmistakable tension that had built over the session. She scribbled one last note, then looked up at me with wide eyes and a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Observation, proximity to human subject produces unexpected emotional engagement. Further evaluation recommended." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Yeah, I think further evaluation is probably unavoidable." She tilted her head thoughtfully, then muttered, "Affirmative. Continued interaction required." And with that, the advanced checkup ended, leaving us both tangled in a mixture of professional duty, chaotic hands-on mishaps, and a growing, undeniable tension that neither science nor protocol could fully explain. For the alien officer, The rigid boundaries of discipline and precision had begun to blur, replaced by curiosity, amusement, and perhaps the first hints of genuine attachment. And for me, navigating her reactions had become not just a challenge, but an unexpectedly thrilling and intimate adventure, setting the stage for what would surely be the most bizarre, funny, and surprisingly romantic checkups of my life. The final session began with a sense of quiet anticipation that neither of us could ignore. The alien officer entered the room with her usual disciplined precision, yet something had changed. There was a subtle softness in her posture, a hint of hesitation before she took her seat on the examination table, and the occasional flick of her eyes toward me that lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. After the chaotic hands-on sessions of the previous days, both of us knew that this final evaluation would either restore order or dissolve it entirely into uncontrollable absurdity, and neither of us had any intention of leaving it orderly. We began with the last set of procedures, combining everything she had previously insisted upon: pulse checks, reflex tests, joint measurements, and balance assessments. Every action required guidance, and every guidance led to repeated, accidental brushes of hands. The tension between us had grown into a charged rhythm, like two dancers moving in sync without realizing it. Her flinches were smaller now, more controlled, yet her eyes flicked toward me with unmistakable interest, scanning my reactions as if to measure them against her own emotional data. During a reflex exercise, our hands collided once more, this time lingering just a moment too long for either of us to ignore. I felt her pulse through her skin, steady yet quickening, and the warmth of proximity made my own heartbeat race. She froze, stylus hovering mid-note, her gaze locked with mine. Unexpected contact duration exceeded predictive models, she muttered, her voice quieter, almost hesitant. I swallowed, trying to maintain composure, though my cheeks had gone uncomfortably warm. Yeah, I said with a nervous laugh. I'd say this is outside the expected parameters. Her lips, or their closest approximation, pressed together in a tight line as she scribbled furiously, yet I could see the subtle twitch of amusement in her eyes. It was clear she was no longer just cataloging data points or measuring anomalies. She was fully aware of the tension, the unspoken attraction that had built over the past sessions, and she was participating. Then came the turning point. As I adjusted her posture for a final stretch, she leaned slightly closer, inadvertently brushing her arm against mine. She froze, eyes widening, and whispered, "Observation, tactile engagement produces pleasure beyond anticipated thresholds." Her words, though couched in scientific language, carried an unmistakable personal undertone. I laughed, my own nervousness spilling into genuine amusement. "You mean, you like this?" Her gaze flicked downward, then back up, and she nodded with surprising frankness. "Yes. Emotional engagement, confirmed. Personal attachment, developing." For a moment, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the medical instruments and the soft, synchronized breathing that had somehow replaced the chaos of earlier sessions. We abandoned our professional pretense, each of us aware that the rigorous protocols, the flinches, the charts, and the scribbled observations had all been a prelude to this strange, hilarious intimacy. She reached toward a nearby device to record some final metrics, but her hand hesitated, brushing mine once again. This time, either of us pulled away immediately. The contact was fleeting, yet enough to send a jolt through both of us, and her eyes betrayed an awareness that went beyond scientific curiosity. The alien officer, meticulous, disciplined, and impossibly precise, had crossed the line from detached observation into something deeply personal. I cleared my throat, heart pounding. "You know, this whole hands-on thing, it's been kind of fun." Her lips twitched in the faintest smile. "Fun is an accurate descriptor," she admitted, tapping her stylus against the tablet. "Unexpected enjoyment detected. Future sessions strongly recommended." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Strongly recommended, huh? Sounds like you've grown attached to the chaos as much as the procedure." "Affirmative," she said, tilting her head. "Data supports continued interaction. Personal engagement, desirable." And in that moment, I realized that the alien officer who had once treated human medical protocols like tactical operations had become something entirely different. She was no longer just disciplined and precise. She was curious, amused, and undeniably engaged with me, not as a subject, but as a person. The professional barriers had dissolved, leaving behind a tension that was chaotic, hilarious, and intimately real. The session ended with a final accidental touch, our hands brushing as we tidied the instruments, and we both froze, sharing a brief, awkward glance that said far more than words ever could. Her notebook, once filled with strict measurements and indecipherable annotations, now contained notes like "interaction enjoyable, emotional spike noted," and "continued contact recommended for optimal engagement." I laughed softly, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. "Well, I guess that concludes your annual checkup, officially." "Yes," she said, eyes flicking toward me with a subtle warmth. "But unofficial evaluations may continue." And with that, the alien officer, once a paragon of discipline and clinical detachment, had become a willing participant in the hilariously unpredictable, awkwardly romantic, and undeniably intimate world of human interaction. The chaos of our hands-on checkups had transformed into a shared experience, a bond that was at once scientific, comedic, and tenderly personal. The annual checkup had started as a routine medical procedure, but it had ended as something far more memorable, an accidental romance born from flinches, brushes of hands, and the unpredictably delightful complexity of human connection. In the quiet aftermath, we shared a final glance, both aware that this was only the beginning of a series of interactions that would be equally chaotic, awkward, and profoundly engaging. The alien officer had discovered that human touch, humor, and proximity were not merely data points. They were experiences to be enjoyed, explored, and perhaps cherished. And I, for my part, realized that navigating her meticulous, disciplined, and hilariously unpredictable world had become something I was eager to continue, one absurdly intimate session at a time.